Hey, welcome to Leaders Underway. This is a channel where we talk about the everyday practice of leadership. My name is Eric Moore. I'm a nuclear engineer. I'm also a former nuclear submarine officer. And for those of you in the audience asking, why won't this dude just enjoy his nights and weekends without making these stupid videos? The principal reason I make these videos is that I think that people who are in STEM, that is STEM students and STEM professionals who are working, would do well to consider leadership dynamics, leadership competencies, and interpersonal dynamics, and not just narrowly focus on their technical competencies. The reason I believe this is because once I started doing this in my life, my career began to open up. I began to experience more success there. And also my understanding of the world and other people also improved, which was a nice benefit as well. So today we have another submarine story, another fun one. This one's fairly short, but I have a lot of discussion on takeaways. So, hey, it's 2024. This is the age of TikTok. I don't use that platform personally. However, my dopamine is also in low supply, just like yours. I find other ways to distract myself. So we're going to go through the takeaways first before we get into the story. So I have two takeaways pertaining to this story. These don't flow into each other. They're kind of mutually exclusive, but I think they're both important. The first one I'm going to go through quite a bit. The second one's a little more short and to the point. So my first takeaway is there are reasons for a given role's expectations and boundaries, and they are often good reasons. To succeed, understand your roles, boundaries, and expectations. My second takeaway from the story is some people are just jerks, okay? But it would be a mistake to use that as an excuse to ignore their message. So let's get into the story. So this story, just to set the stage a little bit, this is from my first deployment on my submarine, nuclear submarine. I was very green, my first year on the boat. And, one thing about military officers is when you go through your commissioning process, you go to your OCS like I did, you do ROTC at university, or you do a service academy, you learn the basics of being a military officer, being in the military. You understand the rank insignia. You understand how to salute. You understand the basics of the community you're a part of, whether that's Army infantry or being in the submarine force or some aviation-related MOS in the Air Force. But what you really don't understand are, I think, two things. You don't understand the particular personalities at the command until you get to know them. And you also don't understand how to truly implement the expectations of your position. Because being an officer in the military, it comes with a lot of expectations, and they set a high bar for who you're supposed to be, how you're supposed to portray yourself, how you're supposed to lead and manage and use your authority. So that takes time to learn. There's quite a bit of balance that goes along with that and a lot of judgment. So suffice it to say, I wasn't really great at any of that stuff when I got to the boat. Okay. I think the ones who tend to be the most natural would be prior enlisted, but you have to understand they're also the cream of the crop. I mean, they were selected among a set of people as the best at what they do and chosen to go commission. So they're usually pretty good. So I wasn't in that boat, no pun intended. I had a lot of learning to do, and I knew that. So I was doing the best I could. On this deployment, we had an ORS. So from the previous videos, the ORS, it's an evaluation for the engine room. That is the officers and the sailors who are nuclear trained on a nuclear platform in the U.S. Navy. So ORS stands for Operational Reactor Safeguards Evaluation. I'm pretty sure that's it. And the ORS is stressful. It takes 3 or 4 days. There'll be like 3 or 4 senior officers from big Navy who come to assess your ship. And they're going to give you an exam. They're going to assess your maintenance records. They're going to go through this and that and give you grades. There's going to be an overall grade at the end. The overall grade makes or breaks people's careers. Usually the captain is my understanding that positions can be very affected by an ORS result. And one of the other things that I spoke about in a previous video was this concept of performing a monitored evolution. And I was slated to have my first monitored evolution during this ORS. So the gentleman who was going to be my evaluator was a commander whose reputation preceded him. He even had a nickname, and it wasn't just like my boat that knew about this dude. Other boats in the waterfront, speaking to their officers, this guy's reputation preceded him. He had a nickname. I'm not going to repeat the nickname as it incorporated a part of his real name, and I just don't use real names in this channel. Try to keep it classy. But yeah, so he had a reputation for being a jerk, essentially. And there's a lot of salty people in the Navy, at least when I was in, and I wasn't looking forward to my potential interactions with him. But I had no say in the matter, and I just was like, we're going to do this and see what happens. So on game day, the monitored evolution was involved a mechanic in my division who was executing a nuclear procedure in the engine room. And this involves turning valves, using the procedure, reading gauges. And I was the evaluator for this evolution. So my job was to evaluate how he was doing and following the procedure and note any issues that I perceived. The position of the commander was to be the senior evaluator. So he would be evaluating both the mechanic's performance in performing the job and my performance in being an evaluator. So we get underway on this monitored evolution, and things didn't seem to be going that poorly. To my knowledge, what I was perceiving, I was trying to be as engaged as possible. I probably didn't really want to be there doing it, but it's part of the job. So I'm trying to be engaged, take notes, follow the procedure, follow what's going on. And we get to a spot in the procedure where the mechanic had to read a gauge. And the gauge was in a spot where it was dark. Obviously the sun's not shining underwater, right? So we carried around flashlights. And you just put it in a pocket of your coveralls and you just carry it everywhere you go. So my mechanic did not have a flashlight on him. Maybe a little oversight on his part. Not the end of the world. I mean, but he kind of did need one for this evolution. It so happened that this junior officer, this ensign, Ensign Moore, I had a flashlight in my pocket. So I'm like, okay, I can keep this thing moving. I can shine my light on the gauge. The mechanic can read it. We can continue with this evolution. No hiccup. And oh, by the way, I kind of look like a stud. I've got my flashlight in front of the evaluator. What a great junior officer. So, without hesitating, I pull out my flashlight, turn it on, and I shine it on the gauge or meter. And that elicited an unexpected result. So certainly it lit up the gauge so the mechanic could read it, but the commander turned his head to me. He looks at me and he goes, "What are you doing?" Just like that, kind of this tone of sorts. And I'm thinking, oh God, I screwed it up, I guess. I guess that wasn't culturally, that was not the correct thing to do in this moment. And so clearly I recognized, hey, I've got a lot to learn. I thought I did something that would be appreciated. Like I'm keeping this thing going so we can get through this evaluation and get moving. And it wasn't appreciated at all. And I learned from my boss later that both myself and the mechanic had failed the evaluation. And I don't recall getting like an exact report. But my boss told me, yeah, you guys both failed. The commander failed you both on this evaluation. So what did I take away from this? Other than I had no idea what culture I was in and I didn't know how to act. So that's not entirely true, but I goofed up on this one particular thing. So first takeaway, right? So let me scroll down on my notes here. Again, there are reasons for a given role's expectations and boundaries. And they are often good reasons. To succeed, understand well the expectations of your roles. So, what roles were at play in this story I just told? Well, there was a performer, the mechanic, turning valves, following the procedure. There was the role of the evaluator. That was me. There was also the senior evaluator role, who was evaluating both myself and the mechanic. So, take a step back. So, what does a role imply? So, I'm going to present it this way. A role implies both a set of expectations and a set of boundaries. So, for an evaluator, what do I not do? What are my boundaries? And what are my expectations? So, for boundaries, I was expected, don't reach in and get my hands dirty as an evaluator. So, I shouldn't start turning valves for the mechanic. That just doesn't make any sense. I didn't do that. I didn't make that mistake. That would be a pretty big error at that point in my career. So I had enough sense not to do that. But the more subtle boundary that I did breach and that the commander called me out on was I took an action that could be construed as breaching my impartiality. So what does that mean? So as an evaluator, I'm supposed to use the objective evidence in front of me without impinging on that performance, like without having an impact on the performance of the performer. So imagine myself as, this is very timely, I'm judging an Olympic event. I need to be like, and I, by the way, I have no idea about judging Olympic events, but I'm just guessing. So if I did anything that could push one performer ahead of the other one, even in an administrative sense or, some words said, that could be construed as impartial and it could be construed as inappropriate, right? So in my particular story, when I took out my flashlight and I shined it on the gauge, I'm not really sure that I actually demonstrated like substantial impartiality. It's not like in doing so, I was really going to make the mechanic pass the evolution when he would have failed before, because we both knew that he didn't have a flashlight, right? Both me and the commander. However, in that community, the standards of performance, the standards of objectivity and impartiality are so high. I mean, this is a community where you have a nuclear reactor, which is one set of standards, right? Very high standards. You also are in the military, which the military loves rules, I think for good reason and for the most part. And you're on a submarine, which you're underwater hundreds of feet, which carries its own set of dangers. So you have a community that is just particularly rigid about some of its expectations. It has very high expectations, and it has particularly rigid role boundaries and expectations. So, and I stumbled into one of those, which was essentially, when you're an evaluator, you do nothing to influence the conduct of the evolution unless there's a safety issue that's about to occur. Like if something unsafe is happening or about to happen, you say, stop, let's stop what we're doing, back up. Other than that, keep your mouth shut and maybe ask some questions. But other than that, don't influence it in any way that could be helping. Because at the end of the day, the expectation was that, here's a submarine with 100 people on it. We have to be able to expect people to serve as evaluators and evaluate essentially people who could be their friends. They're kind of all in it together. They're on the same ship, but there still has to be an objectivity in the ability to call it as it is and to adhere to all the standards and requirements. And if we start to let things go because it's Friday, we want to get out and get a beer, or, you know what, this is my buddy, and like, it doesn't really matter anyway, even though the procedure says something a little bit different, then you start to lose impartiality, you start to lose objectivity, and, who knows where that goes, right? So that's part of integrity, that's part of your objectivity. So, yeah, and, I'm not part of that community anymore, so it's kind of water under the bridge, but, I learned a lot from that experience. I learned a lot from having high standards imposed on me and learning how to perform within that those kind of hierarchy of very high standards. So taking it from that world, which is kind of a crazy, unusual world, how does this reflect in real life? In other words, the ordinary world most of us are accustomed with. I'll take it to a brief story. An experience I had dealing with a contractor at my house. So during 2020, I was doing some renovations on my house, and there was a room in my living room which required some drywall patching before I painted it. So I worked on those patches quite a bit. That was my first drywall work I'd ever done. And lo and behold, I finished all the patches. I did all the sanding, which is painful to sand and then clean it up. And then I found when I pulled the baseboard off, because I was going to replace the baseboard as well, I found that when I put a paint scraper on some paint sticking out past the baseboard or behind the baseboard, I could actually pull all the paint off the wall in huge sheets. So the paint was delaminating. So consequently, I couldn't paint the wall where the paint was falling off, which was every spot on the wall. So I got frustrated and I called a friend and I said, dude, who is your drywall contractor? I need someone to come over and do this for me because I'm at my wit's end. So drywall dude comes over, gave him $200 for this job. It was actually a 2-day job, not difficult for him, and he knocked it out. He did a pretty good job as far as finishing, coating. In drywall, you have to be able to coat such that you can't see the taping and any humps in the wall. It needs to be like a flat wall or a pier. So he was really good at that stuff. I mean, he was very talented when it came to that. There was one hitch, though. So when he left and I went to use an outlet in that wall, and he did the cutouts for the outlets and light switches. However, he didn't anchor the outlets correctly. And so when I went to plug stuff in and pull out the plug from those outlets, like a vacuum cleaner, for instance, the outlet would flex and move, which long term is not safe and short term is just janky. And, I don't want my house to I take pride in my house. I didn't want my outlets to be kind of not secure. So what did I do? Did I call him back? Did I call him on the phone and speak to him sternly and demand he come back and fix it? No, I actually didn't do that. What I did was I just figured it out. So I spent some time researching it, and I found some sleeves on Amazon, bought these sleeves, and installed them, and that fixed the issue. But as a consequence of me going from the homeowner customer role, having to cross into the contractor role, because he should have done that. That was not an expectation we talked about. However, it was an implied expectation of his role as sort of a handyman or drywall guy when there's no one else on the job site. Like there's not an electrician who's going to come behind him and like tidy up the electrical outlets. He really should have done that. So as a consequence of that experience, will I ever call him back? No, I won't. I actually learned how to do drywall after that. I'll just do all my own drywall from now on. Because if I can't, and actually he knew there was something going on with the outlets, and he did kind of like a halfway fix that just didn't work. So that was frustrating, and the price was right. I mean, he didn't, so you could make that argument like, oh, it was a cheap job. Who cares if I had to spend a little extra time? But at the end of the day, I expect, those details to be taken care of if I'm paying for the job, right? And it's not like he articulated ahead of time, hey, this isn't going to be part of my role. It was just a surprise afterwards. So that's kind of what the consequences can be of breaching the expectations of your role or breaching one of the boundaries, is that lack of predictability can mean in the workplace or in a job type role, you're going to lose business, or you're not going to promote, quickly or at all, right? People can't rely on you to be predictable within your role. And I'm not saying being perfect, by the way. I'm simply saying that hitting the top expectations and avoiding breaching the top expectations of a given role is important to being successful within that role. And frankly, that's just not something I would have been able to articulate when I was like 22 or 23. it's only by having the experience in the nuclear business as a nuclear submarine officer and at subsequent jobs, I've realized how important that is, and also how subjective it can be. So, and I'd like to move to a final example on roles. So, a lot of office jobs, and by office job, I don't mean necessarily you're physically in the office, although it certainly could be that. It could be remote jobs. What I'm trying to get at mostly is the concept of knowledge workers. A lot of these jobs can be ambiguous on exactly what the role entails, and so when you're drywalling a wall, I mean it's going to be pretty clear what the expectation is. If you're building a widget in a factory, that should also be pretty clear, although there can be some nuance around that as well. But some of these knowledge jobs can be very subjective. And so I'm going to provide a few thoughts from my experiences on how you might successfully come to understand your role's duties, responsibilities, as well as expectations and boundaries, so that you can succeed within that role. So, and I kind of break this up into first, second, and third order techniques. So, a first order answer to what those roles are, or what the role. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. What the duties and responsibilities might be, what the boundaries would be, what the expectations for your role. The first order answer is look at the position description. Obviously, you should be doing that to prepare for the interview. If you get the job, there's no shame in going back to that and just seeing what your boss tells you day to day, week to week, month to month about what's important in that role. Okay, that's first order. That's like basic stuff. Like, you shouldn't need me to tell you that, right? You should have done that already. The second order answer as to figuring out what your role entails, look at what's rewarded and what is punished. So this could be, when I say rewarded, this could be in a performance sense, annual performance in terms of what raise do you get, what bonus do you get. It can also be what's recognized at staff meetings, management meetings, all hands meetings. What kind of behaviors are being called out as exceptional? And then just as telling can be what is not mentioned. Okay, so what did I bust my butt on, but my management has no words for it at the all hands meeting? It's not mentioned as, wow, thanks for that, working so hard on that. And if it's not mentioned, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they have it out for you. It could mean that wasn't part of your job. That's not part of your role, and you're spending an inordinate amount of time perhaps on something that's not going to get you anywhere. So better to figure that out sooner rather than later, right? And kind of my third order set of behaviors that can help you ferret out what your role is really about, what the expectations and boundaries are, duties and responsibilities, would be to use the results of the first two exercises. In other words, integrate all that data. What is the job description? What does my boss tell me is important? And what is rewarded and what is punished and what is just not even noticed? Take all that information and try to extrapolate, okay, what is something that either I'm not doing, maybe no one's doing in my role that I have kind of vision for as potentially being useful. Obviously, be careful with that because you don't want to start doing other people's jobs, and there are certain businesses where from a legal perspective, perhaps you can't do other people's jobs or you can't get outside your swim lane. However, to the extent that you can, and it doesn't hurt to use your imagination to think, try to get outside the box and think about how can I do my job better. And how can I fulfill aspects of my role that maybe haven't even been imagined yet by the people I work for? That's usually impressive if you can pull that off, right? So that was my takeaway on roles. Like I said, that was perhaps a bit lengthy, but I think that this topic is pretty fascinating. And I think that in particular, when you change jobs, change roles, or you're working in the same role for a new boss or new management, it's really useful to periodically revisit um, uh, these thoughts on what truly are my expectations, what truly are my boundaries, and have they changed with a new set of managers? Have they changed with time with the same manager? And it's never going to hurt you to consider these topics, and often it's going to save you time. It's going to save you heartache. It's going to potentially lead to you truly mastering the role that you're in. Okay, and not to say, and again, don't get perfectionist about it, but I think continual improvement's a beautiful thing. So there it is. That's enough on roles. So I have a second takeaway I talked to you about earlier. Second takeaway being, hey, some people are just jerks, okay? But it would be a mistake to always use that as an excuse to ignore their message, all right? Look, if I'm pumping my gas at a gas station and I leave the nozzle in my gas tank and I'm about to drive off and someone yells, hey, you idiot, what are you doing? You must be the dumbest person in town. Like you're about to, do tens of thousands of dollars worth of damage. You're about to ruin the car. I'd be like, oh, dude, thank you so much. I'm an idiot. That was really stupid. So, in that case, the person yelling at me delivered the message in a contemptuous way, in a rude way. But like the person said, it saved me having to go fix my car, pay tens of thousands of dollars of damage. So am I thankful for that bystander who's kind of a jerk or came across as a jerk? Or am I sort of contemptuous? Is it hurt my feelings? I mean, my feelings may be a little bit hurt, but in the end, I know that it was awesome that they saved me. So that's kind of a dramatic example, but when someone comes to you, that's both a dramatic example and it's also a very direct example. A lot of times, when someone comes to you with a message that you need to hear, but it comes in a package we don't like, it can be more subtle. And so, I would definitely say guard against that first instinct to reject the message and the messenger when they come in a rude way or kind of a salty way. A lot of times these people have something to teach you. And if you want to, get better, to succeed, it's best that you listen to all valuable input you can. So, in the story at hand that I just told, the Oar Sport commander was communicating something to me. And it was important to my job over the next 3 years that I understand the full content of that message. This was one of those cases where it was kind of like a slap in the face, metaphorically. So I picked it up pretty quickly and I didn't make the same mistake again, right? So in this case, I was able to learn from it. But, there were other times where someone had something to tell me and I didn't like the way that it came across. And, I was tempted to dismiss it out of hand or not give it the message, the credence it deserved. So I would advise you guard against that and don't let your sort of ego get in the way of some free advice, right? So that's my story. Those are my two takeaways. Hopefully you got something out of this. I would say, I would recommend, I would ask you to think about the roles that you play in your life, both your professional role or your career role, your family roles, and your roles with your friends, maybe in particular hobbies. Think about over the past year or two, how have you fulfilled the expectations of those roles? And what are ways that you've potentially fallen short in fulfilling those expectations? On the boundary side, think about how have I stayed within those boundaries? What are ways that I fell outside those boundaries in the last few years? Because although this story and others are from a faraway nuclear submarine, they're really meant for you, the viewer, so you can be a leader underway in your life. Thanks for sticking with me, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.